Good day, everyone, and to our professor in quantitative research and evaluation design, Ms. Ami Buwan. Good day to you, ma'am. I am Maria Teresa G. Tadena, and my task is to share with you the topic causal comparative research. I have here some of the objectives that we try to meet as we go along with this topic. We get to familiarize and at least explain what is meant by the term causal comparative research and how this research is similar to and different from correlational and experimental researches. We get to identify and at least do brief description and the steps involved in conducting causal comparative research. Draw a diagram of the sign and how data are collected, and to describe the threats to the internal validity and on how to control these threats. These are some of the objectives that we are going to tackle as we discuss this lesson. So, causal comparative research. Causal comparative research is sometimes referred to the Latin phrase ex post facto. Ex post facto research because both the effect or effects and the alleged cause or causes have already occurred. Hence, the researcher in this type of research has to study this in a retrospect manner. In this type of research, the researcher attempts to determine the cause or consequences of differences that already existed between or among groups of individuals. I have here a situation that would help us understand causal comparative research more. This is the scenario here is at the year-end faculty party when the two teachers are talking about what happened in their the whole school year. Teacher one shared that she was a bit discouraged that things did not turn out the way she wanted it to be. She shared that most of her students did not seem to like her teaching, and they did not do well in the final exam, in which teacher two shared that one of their co-teacher used some inquiry science materials. And she remembered it when she was being told that her students really like those materials. So she shared it to teacher one and said that maybe you can try it next term. So teacher one now is wondering whether that approach would work for her. So if you were teacher one, in order for you to know that the same approach worked for you, so you must use causal comparative research. In that scenario, the researcher noted the difference between two groups of students and then attempt to find the cause or causes of that difference. Note that in this type of research, the difference has already occurred, and the difference that is being considered here, this is what we call as the outcome or the effect that is considered in this research as the dependent variable. In the book of Frankel and Wallen, there are three types of causal comparative research. And these are exploration of effects, exploration of causes, and exploration of consequences. Now, how this causal comparative research is similar to or how it differs to correlational research. So, similarities are being presented here. It is in your screen. Causal comparative research shares some similarities with other forms of research like correlational and experimental researches. However, there are also significant disparities. Comparing it to correlational research, both forms of research study the relationships between variables. But in causal comparative research, the researcher here has to explore on which variable serves as the cause or causes of the difference between the compared groups and also which one is being affected. While in correlational research, it detects whether there is a correlation between the variables that being compared. It determines whether there is no correlation. It determines whether there is a positive correlation or there is a negative correlation. But these relationships do not mean that one variable affects another. And that makes causal comparative research different from correlational research. So these are the differences also. From the book, these are the differences presented in both causal comparative and correlational researches. So in causal comparative research, typically, typically it compares two or more groups of subjects, while in correlational, it requires a score on each variable for each subject. Then, in causal comparative, it involves at least one categorical variable, while in correlational, it has to investigate two or more quantitative variables. And in causal comparative research, the data is being analyzed or the data are analyzed by comparing averages or uses cross-break tables. While in the correlational, as was discussed last time, it used scatter plots and or correlation coefficients. Now, how this causal comparative research is similar to and different to experimental research. Now, both require at least one categorical variable. And both researches compare group performances to determine relationships. And for their differences, in the causal comparative research, in here, there is no manipulation of the variables, while in experimental research, the independent variable can be manipulated. And in causal comparative research, it provides weaker evidence for causation, while in experimental, it provides stronger evidence for causation. Now, that difference, why it is weaker? It provides weaker evidence for causation. It's because in the comparative research, the researcher here cannot be sure that she is 100% certain. He cannot be 100% certain whether the variable that she or he is testing is the one that caused the effect. It might be that there are other variables causing the effect. While in the experimental, you are studying both of that variables, and you can be sure that the relationship of these variables may cause the effect of this variable. Then, in causal comparative research, the groups are already formed. While in experimental, the researcher can sometimes assign subjects to treatment groups. There are steps involved in causal comparative research. The first one is problem formulation. In problem formulation, in this step, usually the researcher identifies and defines the particular phenomena of interest. And then the researcher considers possible causes or consequences of this phenomena. Once possible causes of the phenomena have been identified, they are incorporated into a more precise statement of the research problem that the researcher wishes to investigate. And once the researcher has formulated already the problem statement, the next step is to select the sample of individuals to be studied. The researcher here has to define carefully the characteristic to be studied and then to select groups that differ in these characteristics. And then there is instrumentation. In here, there are no limits on the types of instruments to be used in order to gather data. The researcher here can use either achievement tests, questionnaires. He can use interview schedules, attitudinal measures, or other observational devices. Then there is design. This involves selecting two or more groups that differ on a particular variable of interest and comparing them on another variable or variables. The groups here in the design, the groups may differ in one of two ways. So the first one is like this. So this is example of the basic causal comparative design. In this example, one group possesses a characteristic that the other does not. So you can see here that the independent variable in the first group, there is dropouts, and wherein there is no characteristic present on the second group. And the second design is this one. The groups that you compared differ on known characteristics. So meaning both of the groups have known characteristics. Like in this example, so there is in the first group, there is the counselor, and on the other is teachers. The causal comparative design is a research design that seeks to find relationships between independent and dependent variables after an action or event has already occurred. There are threats to the internal validity in the causal comparative research. One of the major threats to the internal validity of causal comparative research is the possibility of a subject characteristics threat. This happens because since the groups are already formed, the researcher has nothing to do with the selection or comparison of the compared. The researcher has nothing to do with the selection or the formation of the comparison groups. There is always a tendency that the groups are not equivalent in one or more important variables other than the identified group membership variables. But there are also ways that the researcher can use to reduce the chance of subject characteristics threats, and that is matching of the subject. Another way to reduce this threat is finding or creating a homogeneous subgroups. And the third is statistical matching. There are also other threats to the internal validity of causal comparative research. That is loss of subjects or mortality, location, instrumentation, history, and maturation. The data analysis and causal comparative research, the first step in analyzing the data is to construct a frequency polygon. Then means and standard deviations are usually calculated if the variables are uh, quantitative. The most commonly used test is a t-test for the differences between means. And analysis of covariance is particularly useful in causal comparative research. This lesson was taken from the book of Frankel and Wallen, the book How to Design and Evaluate Research in Education. This can be found in pages 366 to 391. Thank you.